Hello, in this video we're going to be talking about congruence and corresponding parts. First of all, we need to know what the congruence symbol looks like. This symbol is made up of two parts, and basically what it means, same size and shape. And just to show you where that comes from, same size is actually our equal sign, plus the same shape comes from that symbol, which means similar. That's something you did in 7th grade. So same size and shape. So your two symbols are an equal sign and a similar shape, or a similar symbol, and those come together to give you the congruent symbol. So congruence means same size and shape. Now, to do what we're doing today, there's a few symbols that I want to make sure that you remember how to do. So first we have a line segment. And a line segment does not go on for infinity. It's made up of two endpoints, and to actually write this, you would do a little line segment and you'd put A, B. You could also flip that around and say BA. Both of those would be fine. Now a line is different because a line goes on for infinity, but you still need to have a couple points on there. So to denote this, you would draw a little line. We don't put little points on it, and you could say CD, or you could say line DC. Now here's something that we're not really going to be dealing with today, but that would be array, and what that means is you have an endpoint and this goes on only in one direction. We did talk about arrays when we did scatter plots. Now this is very specific how you write these. When you write this, you draw a little ray, but the first thing that has to be here is the endpoint. So there's only one way to write this. And there we go. Your angle, this is what we're going to be dealing with quite a bit. For an angle, you will have 3 points here. So I'll just write out the letters G, H, I, and there's two ways you could do this. You could write the little angle symbol here and say G, H, I, or you could say angle I, H, G. The important part here is that your H has to be in the middle. H is your vertex that's the middle. So that has to be there. And now our last one is to be able to write the measure of the angle. So all you do is you put a little M standing for measure. So it'd be measure of angle GHI or the measure of angle IHG. Okay, let's go right into what I'm talking about here today. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at corresponding parts of congruent figures. So we're going to take two figures like this right here, and what I'm going to have you do is just make a statement that these two things are equal, or excuse me, equal in size and equal in shape, meaning they are congruent. So these are the symbols that we're actually going to be using today. This is a triangle symbol, which means that this triangle ABC, that's this one, is actually congruent to triangle DEF. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say all the little parts are congruent. So if you notice the symbols, A and D are both the same. You'll have to notice a little arc that's drawn in there. Now you may notice that B and E both have a right angle symbol in them, so they are congruent. And C and F, do you notice that they have these little two arcs in there? That means these two correspond, they go together. Similarly, we have with the sides, this symbol goes with this one, which means those two sides are congruent. The double dashes go with the double dashes over here. That means those two sides are congruent. And the triple goes with the triple over here, meaning those two sides are congruent. So basically what I'm going to show you is how to just make these statements, and that's really our only concept for today. The other thing that I would like to bring back is the idea of our transformations. So earlier in this unit, and we started this unit a while ago, we had translations. That's a slide. That's when you take something and you slide it one place or another. Reflection, that's when it flips over. Rotation, that's when it's been turned. And dilation, which is actually going to be our next lesson, is when you enlarge or shrink something. Okay, so I'm just going to bring some of that back. So for example, in this, we have two congruent triangles here. It actually is the result of a reflection. It looks like it's been turned. A lot of kids would say this has been rotated and turned. However, you may notice the symbols. That this goes with this. E goes along with J, which means this was actually flipped over this line right here. Okay, with that said, let's make a list of our corresponding angles. So we have angle F which corresponds with angle H. We have angle G. Oh, now that's hard. I can't say just angle G. And the reason why that's a little bit tricky is if I look at G, I actually have four angles there. I have these two, but then I have these two angles right here. So there's actually four angles here with G. I can't list it this way. I've got to be a little bit more specific. So if I want to say angle G, I think I'm going to do FGE. So angle FGE is congruent to angle. Now this is where it gets a little tricky, because if I say F here, then my first letter has to be the one that corresponds with F. So that's going to be H, G, so it's going to be H, G, J. And I have no choice. I have to list it that way. You could have listed it as angle, whoops, and that's an E. I could have said angle EGF, but if I'm going to do it that way, I would have to reverse the order here on the letters and say HGH. Okay, so one way or the other. So I'm going to erase this. And my last one is angle E is congruent to angle J. So basically we're going to say, all right, what matches up? What two parts match up? That's all we're essentially doing here. Okay, let's take a look at corresponding sides. So I'm going to take a look at this side right here. Notice it has that single dash in it. What does that go with? Well, it goes with this side over here. So we're going to say line segment FG is congruent to line segment. Now be very careful. If I use the F first here, then what goes with the F on the other triangle? Well, that would be H. So this would be HG. Okay, your next line segment. Let me change the pen color here. This one goes along with this side right here. So I'm going to say line segment FE is congruent to line segment. Now if I started with the F, it means I'm going to have to start with what corresponds with F. So that's going to be HJ. And the last one, and I'll change the pen color, is this line segment right here, which goes with that one right here. So this is going to be line segment. I'm going to say EG is congruent to line segment. So now we have to say, okay, what goes with E? And that would be J. So the E and the J would both have to be first. Now you could list this as GE, but if you're going to list that as GE, then you would also have to list on the other side, you would have to say GJ. So you'd have to be consistent on both sides. Now let's do one final statement here. And this is a statement to say that the two triangles are congruent. So I'm going to say triangle F GE is congruent to triangle. Now I have to keep the letters in the same order, so that means it's going to have to be HGJ. Okay, let's look at another one here. Okay, so this triangle looks like two things have happened. First of all, I can see all the corresponding parts. My list of corresponding angles can be easy. I could say angle W is congruent to angle. So you've got to look at the symbols and say, okay, what matches with W? And that would be X. I could say angle U is congruent to angle Y. And therefore angle S must be congruent to angle T. Let's list the corresponding sides. Okay, so our first side here, so I'll say line segment WU. Now here's the tricky part. I started with the W, so I've got to make sure that I have the correct start over here. So what goes with the W? Well, let's see. X goes with the W. So it's going to have to be X, and the other endpoint is Y, so XY. Okay, continuing on maybe with my colors here. Let me choose a different color. So now I've got this line segment, which goes with, I'm looking at the double dashes, this one right here. So I'm going to say line segment US is congruent to line segment. So now I have to figure out what goes with the U. And that looks like Y, so it's going to be Y. And at the other end I've got T. Let's do another one. Let's do this line segment right here, which is line segment WS is congruent to line segment, so we got to figure out what goes with the W, and that would be X. So this is going to be XT. So I'm going to make one final statement here. I'm going to say triangle WUS is congruent to triangle. Now I have to follow the same order. So what goes with W over here? Well, that would be X. What goes with the U on the other triangle? That would be Y. And then, of course, your T. Okay, let's try another one here. Oh, and let's go back to this one. Let's at least see what was the transformation that happened here. This looks like it's been rotated. Then it looks like it's been moved. So then it looks like it's been translated. Okay, let's take a look at this one. So this kind of looks the same. This kind of looks like we've rotated and translated. And translated. Okay. Our corresponding angles here. So we could say angle K is congruent to angle, so you got to look at your symbols here, Q. Angle M is congruent to angle, you got to look at your symbols, L. Whoops. And that's not an L. This is an L. And angle P and R look like they go together. So angle R is congruent to angle P. Now just so that you know, I'm writing this kind of in shorthand here, but there is another way you could write these. You could have said angle MRK is congruent to, I'd have to stay with the same letters on the other triangle, in other words the same order, so it'd have to be L PQ. And you're going to notice that on my answer key with your notes today. So when you do your independent practice, you'll notice that mine ultimately have the 3 letters. What I'm going to say is you can go ahead and do your angles with one letter as long as there is no other angle with that letter. In other words, there was a little bit of a conflict with angle G because G had several angles there. Okay? So in other words, well, I'll just move on to corresponding sides. I think you might get the idea here. Alright, corresponding sides. Let's take a look at our corresponding sides. Let's go with this side right here. So line segment MK is congruent to line segment. Gotta watch my order. I started with M, so that means I gotta go with the L. So line segment LQ. Next one. These two, this might be a little hard to read. Line segment MR is congruent to line segment. Okay, so I gotta go what corresponds with M, and that's going to be LP. And why did I write Q? It's LP. And finally, running out of colors here, I'm going to go with line segment KR is congruent to line segment QP. So now let's make our triangle statement. Triangle MKR is congruent to triangle. Now you got to keep the order right. So if you like the color coordinating, that actually helps a little bit. LQP. Okay, this actually looks like it's been reflected. Looks like it's been reflected over here. So your corresponding angles. Now here's exactly what I'm talking about, angle A. I can't just say angle A is congruent to angle A. That's too confusing. I can't do that. So what I'm going to have to say here is angle DAC. So if I trace that DAC, that's this angle right here, is congruent to angle, well, on the other one here, it's going to have to be BAC. I can say that angle D is congruent to angle B because there's no conflicts there. Those are completely on their own. There are no other angles there, so I'm fine with you doing it that way. You could list it as 3 letters. That's fine. C is another one that's a little bit on the tricky side, so I'm going to have to use 3 letters for C. So I'm going to have to say angle DCA is congruent to angle. It means if I started with the D on this side, I'm going to have to start with the B on this side. Angle BCA. Your corresponding sides. These can be a little on the easier side here. So I can say line segment DA is congruent to line segment BA. I could say line segment DC is congruent to line segment, that would have to be BC, and then our final one is actually the same line, so it's this one right here. So we could say line segment AC is congruent to line segment AC. Okay, our final statement here is going to be your corresponding triangles. So we're going to say triangle ADC, and you can start with any letter you want here. I just started with A, is congruent to triangle. Now you got to be careful with your order. It's going to have to be A, B, C. And we are done. So what I'd like you to do right now is I'd like you to try, there's a practice. Now I've already written out most of it. All you have to do is just fill in the order of the letters. You have to pay attention to the order of the letters. So there's 3 questions. All you have to do is fill in the order of the letters. Good luck.